Okay, so in the absolute chaos of an emergency room, what's the one thing that can make the difference between life and death? It's not always some fancy new machine or a genius surgeon. As we're about to see from these stories in Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto, sometimes it all comes down to something as simple and as easy to overlook as a conversation. Our first story kicks off on Halloween night in San Francisco. A surgeon gets a case that he thinks is gonna be easy. His exact words to describe it were, "No big deal."
Yeah, famous last words, right?
So the patient was at a Halloween party, got into a fight, and shows up with this neat little 2-inch slit in his belly. Now, he's drunk, he's babbling, but his vitals, they're stable. It really looks like a routine open and shut case.
Because the patient seemed okay, the team wasn't in a huge rush. They were taking their time, getting the OR prepped. They felt like they had it all completely under control.
And this is the exact moment when no big deal turns into a frantic life or death emergency. The calm in that trauma bay just completely shattered. And the crash was unbelievably fast. I mean, 1 second he's talking nonsense, and the next, he goes silent. His heart rate shoots through the roof, his blood pressure just vanishes, and his eyes roll back in his head. The whole team was just caught completely flat-footed.
All of a sudden, it's a mad dash. The surgeon grabs his scalpel and just slices into the guy's abdomen, racing against the clock to figure out what is going on before it's too late. And what they find is just catastrophic. That little 2-inch wound had actually punctured the man's aorta, the main artery coming right off the heart, an ocean of blood, as he put it. The tiny cut on the outside gave them no clue about the absolute devastation on the inside.
Incredibly, the patient survived. But the surgeon just couldn't let it go. He kept replaying it in his head, trying to figure out how they almost lost him, how their first take on the situation was so wrong. And here's the really wild part. Technically, the team did everything perfectly. They followed every single protocol, they did a head-to-toe exam, they tracked his vitals, they performed hundreds of steps correctly, all under insane pressure. By the book, they were flawless.
So if they did 1,000 things right, what was the one thing that went wrong? Well, it turns out the massive error wasn't about medical skill. It wasn't about knowledge. It was a failure of simple curiosity. It was a failure to have a simple conversation.
And this is it. This is the whole point. No one, not one person, thought to ask the patient or the paramedics a super simple question. What was he stabbed with? The entire team just made an assumption. They saw a small wound and they pictured a small knife. The weapon was a bayonet from a Halloween costume, a bayonet that was over a foot long. As the surgeon said later, your brain just doesn't go there. You don't expect a bayonet wound in the middle of San Francisco. That one single, unasked question, that was the difference between a routine case and an almost fatal disaster.
Now, you might be thinking this is just one crazy story, right? One unlucky night in the ER. But it actually points to a much bigger, much more important idea about what it means to be an expert today.
In his book, Gawande calls this the problem of extreme complexity. He argues that fields like medicine have gotten so incredibly complicated that the biggest failures don't happen because we don't know enough. They happen because we miss the simple, obvious stuff that's right in front of our faces. And that leads to a pretty startling realization. Just being an expert isn't enough anymore. The most brilliant, well-trained people in the world can still fail. Not because of a gap in their knowledge, but because of a gap in their curiosity. Because of the questions they don't even think to ask. And believe it or not, this exact same pattern, this failure of conversation, pops up again in another story Gawande tells. This time we're in the middle of a major cancer operation. So, picture this. The patient is stable, the surgery's going great, they're about halfway through, and then, out of absolutely nowhere, the heart monitor just goes flat, a deadline. The machine is screaming at them that the patient's heart has stopped. The surgeon looks up and asks the anesthesiologist a really direct question. Hey, is that asystole? He's basically asking, has our patient's heart just stopped beating? Is he dead? But listen to the response he gets. A lead must have fallen off. It's an instant dismissal, an assumption. The anesthesiologist just assumes it's an equipment glitch. And just like that, a potentially life-saving conversation is over before it even starts. So you have a bayonet in San Francisco and a flat line in a routine surgery. Both of these intense moments bring us right to the central lesson of this deep dive. In both of these incredibly high-stakes situations, the thing that almost led to disaster wasn't a slip of the scalpel or a broken machine. The weak point, the point of failure, was the conversation. In the first story, a crucial conversation never even happened, and in the second, it got shut down immediately.
And this is why this stuff matters, way beyond the walls of a hospital. It means that in any complex thing we do, whether it's surgery or running a business, the simple act of talking things through, of asking the dumb, obvious question, might just be the most important step of all.
So, at the end of the day, this question isn't just for surgeons, it's for every single one of us. If the world's top experts, the best in their fields, can miss something so obvious, what simple, vital questions are we failing to ask in our own work and in our own lives?